came to Massad in 1945. When we got off the bus, we were ushered into the dining room, and everything was in Hebrew. Now, I was a graduate of the 8th grade of Ramaz. I certainly knew Hebrew, but I had never quite used it as a spoken language. And I wondered, why did I come here? Why did my parents send me here?
I remember going to an interview with Shlomo Schulzinger in 1965, who spoke to me only in Hebrew. I was a yeshiva boy. I knew very little Hebrew, and what Hebrew I knew was really in Mishnaic Hebrew, and any Hebrew that I spoke was in Ashkenazis. So I was like a lost child in this interview. I had no idea what was going on. I said to my parents, "You must be out of your mind because I'll never make it."
To give you an idea of how little Hebrew I knew, Billa was very interesting. She was a wonderful woman. She was overall head of the kitchen, but she had a very loud voice, which she often used. The response to most questions, which is the obvious Hebrew Israeli response, Beseder, Beseder. And I kept on thinking, the first day, 2, 3, it's not Pesach. What is she talking about a Seder all the time for?
The first time I came to Massad Aleph, I was shocked. I never saw a place in America which people are speaking in Hebrew, playing in Hebrew, Hada Ochel, which is the dining room, speaking in Hebrew. So for me it was like I came back to Israel.
You came to Massad. You felt you are actually in what we call Eretz Israel Bezeir Anpin, a small Israel. The streets were named after people like Chana Senish, Ulam Chana Senish, the auditorium Henrietta Solt, Rehov Harav Kook.
There was an extraordinary sense of idealism at Massad. Everything was about Israel. Everything was about Hebrew. Every bunk had a name about Israel. We had to learn the background of that name, what that particular village was in Israel and where it was. And we were trying to recreate the experience of Israel with gananut, gardening, with omanut, with arts and crafts.
Massad was an introduction to so many things that when I encountered the real thing here in Israel, I thought, oh, that's just like Massad.
I felt like someone had taken me and just immersed me into a Zionist mikvah and turned me on to Israel.
I don't think that anyone who went to Massad for more than one summer could not have been touched with the Israel bug. It made Israel very much alive. It made our Hebrew-Israeli identity a very important part of our lives and our beings.
Shlomo Schulzinger, Alav Hashalom, was one of the greatest Jewish educators of my day. He came from Israel initially and then Baltimore. He was a teacher in the yeshiva of Flatbush, and he had this dream, together with his wife Rivka, who was the librarian in Flatbush, of creating a Hebrew-speaking Zionist camp.
10 שנים לפני כן, והיה גר בבולטימור. בבולטימור הוא היה שייך לקבוצת הבונים, בזמנו, והיה להם מחנה קיץ, לקבוצה הזאת, שהיא הייתה קבוצה חלוצית, שמטרתה הייתה לחנך את החניכים בבולטימור, לעלות לארץ, והיה להם מחנה קיץ. והוא לקח כמה מן הרעיונות שהיו במחנה שמה, והוא העלה אותם למסד.
The idea for Massad, the kernel of the idea for a Hebrew-speaking camp, came from a group of intellectual educators that Shlomo Schulzinger was part of. They were idealists, Hebraists, Zionists, not religious people at all. And their love for the Hebrew language and Zionism is what spurred them on. Remember, we're talking pre-State of Israel. to inculcate the love for a state, the love of Zionism, and the love for the Hebrew language was revolutionary.
He started with a day camp in Far Rockaway, and then went to Monticello, and then I think in 1943 came to Tannersville, Pennsylvania.
במחנה היומי היו לנו 22 ילדים, זה הכל. ובאמצע הם נרשמו לחודש. אבל אנחנו רצינו שיהיו 2 חודשים, לא חודש אחד. הקיץ הם 2 חודשים. אז איך, מה עושים? הם נרשמו לחודש. אז אנחנו הלכנו, היה לנו ידיד טוב מאוד, חיים אברמוביץ, שהוא ניהל איזה בית ספר בברוקלין, והוא הלך ממקום למקום והשיג ילדים בחינם, כדי שיבואו למחנה היומי ויהיו עוד חודש אחד, וועד החינוך היהודי נתן לנו מלגה של $500, אני חושבת, ועל ידי זה המחנה יכול היה להתקיים.
Some years later, and that was by the time I came to Massad in 1950, they had purchased the second site 40 miles away in Dingman's Ferry, which was Massad Bet, and even later yet, they purchased another site near the Massad Aleph site, which was Massad Gimel.
I remember him from camp and coming and telling stories of how he decided to open Camp Massad in the Poconos because God appeared to him in a vision and said, Po Kano, here you should buy.
Massad Bet started out quite simply because Massad Aleph was already full. And it started out exactly the way Massad Aleph was. Ultimately, it was run by Rabbi Bernstein and Rabbi Moskowitz and Alav HaShalom, my colleague, Dr. Noam Shadovsky. It took on a slightly different character, most of it, I think, because Shlomo wasn't there. He used to come one day a week, and everybody knew, Shlomo's coming, got to get ready.
When is Massad Aleph happy? When Shlomo's a Massad Beit. When is Massad Beit happy? When Shlomo's Massad Aleph. When are both camps happy? When Shlomo's on the road.
מהרו סידרו ניקו את הצריף כי שלמה בא היום בדרך כלל המחנה במצב היום אבל שלמה בא היום כל דבר הוא מבקר למפקד אסור לאחר בלעדיך יותר נוח להסתדר שלמה שנעתה מפגר.
Shlomo was a benevolent tyrant. He was tough, he was feared, but he had his light side.
One afternoon, he catches me on campus in the camp, and he says to me, Shmaryahu, there's a puddle on the porch of Ulam Zold, the big Zold hall in Massad Aleph. And I looked at him like he was crazy. He says to me, you don't understand why there's a puddle on the porch? And I said to him, no, as far as I know, there isn't a puddle on the porch. And he said to me, you see, the bulletin board on the outside on the porch? It's crying. And the tears are creating a puddle. And why is the bulletin board crying? Because there's nothing on the bulletin board. Don't you think you ought to take care of that?
On the wall of the library was written, I'll never forget, HaKadosh Baruch Hu bocheh al kol mi she'efshar lo la'asok b'Torah ve'eino osek b'Torah. And Shlomo, I remember, once walked into my bunk in Shoresh, and he said to the kids, he passed by the library, and he heard crying, and he walked in, and the books were crying, because there were no children interested in reading them and taking them out. And it was just a very, sweet kind of repartee that I've never forgotten.
I was afraid of Shlomo as a little girl. I didn't understand what he was doing or anything. Didn't understand this big project and his devotion to it. I was a little girl. And if he looked at me, it was an honor. But I was afraid of Shlomo, absolutely.
יראה. יראה של כבוד. יראה של כבוד. מדוע? יש לי רק תשובה אחת. שלמה דרש מעצמו, וכל מה שהוא דרש מעצמו, הוא דרש גם מן האחרים.
He was strong. You know, sometimes the people who's the leader has to make decisions. And he has to say, this is what we're going to do. And this is the direction.
Shlomo seems to me to have been a mishugala davar. Someone who was just fanatical about one idea. And he managed to create something that lasted 40 years, which is a tremendous accomplishment, influenced thousands and thousands of people. Rabbis from across the Jewish spectrum, teachers, Jewish leaders, Jewish lay people who had a knowledge of Hebrew and a greater passion for Jewish life as a result of his work.
Everything was Hebrew. You woke up in the morning, Mayor Moskowitz would wake us up on the call rum, on the loudspeaker, Boker Tov, Machaneh, Massad, Bet.
It was kind of like living on the set of MASH. There were always announcements. Mezeg ha'avir karir hayom. Kol echad mitbakesh lilbosh tzimriya kala. I remember that, because if you say that to an Israeli now, they will laugh you out of the room. Because, well, sveter. What's a tzimriya? They were speaking Ben Yehuda's Hebrew.
On rainy days, the chant that came over the loudspeaker, Geshem yored b'machaneh Massad, kol echad lachzor, let's read miyad.
Hayom, ha-Cardinals St. Louis nitzchu et ha-Dodgers Brooklyn 4-3.
If you spoke a word in English, the ball would go over to the other team in basketball, or if you were a batter or on the batter's team, a strike would be called on the batter, or a ball if you were in the field. And it was a brilliant way of getting people to speak Hebrew. And for the most part, it worked. People really did it, or they shut up because you just didn't want your team to lose.
If you went to the dining room and you asked for something in English, you got nothing, for example. If you didn't speak Hebrew, you got nothing.
Hebrew is so important at camp that we got awards for speaking Hebrew. And I actually got the Ayin, which was the award for speaking Hebrew, because I said Hachta'ah and Kadur when I was playing baseball. Now, the highest award of all in camp was Chonel Mofet. That was the award given to the model camper. I didn't get that, ever.
To this day in Israel, if I speak English on the street or even in the house, I feel guilty about speaking English and not Hebrew. And I can almost sense that Shlomo will soon come and tap me on the shoulder and say, Shlomo, ani Shlomo Agadol, ani omer lecha Ivrit, Ivrit.
Music is what everybody went to Massad about, music and culture. People didn't go to Massad to play basketball. It wasn't a sports camp. It wasn't a rich kids camp. It was a camp where people went to because they were identifying with Israel, and their parents wanted them to identify with Israel through its music and culture. The evening of every single summer, also the most scary part of my summer life, was what's called Zimriya, because it was this huge competition and everybody and anyone from miles around came to hear what Massad was doing that year at the Zimriya.
כל לידה הייתה כותבת שיר, וכל שיר היה מתחרה עם אז היו לנו המון זמריות. שירה במחנה היה אחד הדברים הכי יפים שהיה במסד. שירה. כל הזמן שרו. בלי הפסקה שרו ושרו ושרו.
There was so much music in Massad. It was, everybody thinks of Massad as a Hebrew camp, but I can tell you, it was a music camp.
Drama at Massad was a very big deal. Every summer, Machzor Aleph and Machzor Bet each put on a play. I remember performing in South Pacific one year, and the costumes were terrific. We had set design people. Every afternoon we went to Ulam Herzl for our rehearsals. We put on 2 or 3 performances, and I can still remember as one of the leads in South Pacific singing Leil Aviv Maksim Hu, you know, the Some Enchanted Evening.
Ani echloch ha'isha ze meroshi, ani echloch ha'isha ze meroshi, ani echloch ha'isha ze meroshi, eshlach lo lidarko.
It was remarkable because all these plays were done in Hebrew. The scripts had been translated.
It's just embedded in my brain. Massad, 10 years of Massad are embedded in my brain. Maccabiah at Camp Massad was always at the high point of the summer. Certainly one of the high points of the summer. Who is going to be Rosh Pluga, what team you're going to be on, the sports, the singing. Maccabiah was an exciting, exciting time. My first year in Massad Bet, 1969, color war broke out because they had a pretend wedding and they went under the chuppah and the chuppah sides fell down and all the papers, which team you were on, came out from inside the chuppah. As an 8-year-old, I thought that was the best.
I still bump into kids, now that I'm a rabbi, who are on my team in Maccabiah, who say, you're the same Jerry Skolnick that was my Rosh Pluga in 1968.
The topics of the Maccabiah would be the different immigrations to Israel. So we would sing Russian songs, we would sing the Yemenite songs.
The creation of the Maccabiah was an act of genius educationally. We learned during those 4 days, we learned so much about Eretz Yisrael, its history and its current events. You just absorbed it without even realizing that you were absorbing it. This was all created by Shlomo and Rivka and the people that they brought together.
Kabbalat Shabbat, it was all set up outside. And you'd sing, all the prayers for Kabbalat Shabbat and usher in the Shabbat in the outdoors.